Hello, Gen Bio 2 class. We're going to talk about digestive system today. I hope you're all doing okay. And I want to tell you that you should be studying. I know it's hard because now everything is up to you and you're completely responsible for how much you learn. And it's a lot harder than coming to lectures, but use this time wisely. Spend time with the lectures, watch the videos, look at the interactive tutorials, do your homework, do whatever you can to stay on top of things. It's gonna be okay. We'll get through this semester and we're all gonna emerge at the end stronger and better for it. Okay, so let's talk about digestion. What types of digestive systems we have? Well, we can divide all animals into three groups based on how they digest their food. We know that all animals that eat plants, and only plants, are called herbivores. Carnivores are animals that will eat other live animals. And omnivores can eat both plants and animals, and we humans are omnivores. What is the advantage of having a digestive system? Well, if you think about it, it is quite a wonderful invention, evolutionary invention of animals, because it really is a bag that allows you to eat very large chunks of food and then unleash all kinds of digestive enzymes on it, that letting the enzymes work their magic, break foods down into their basic components, so single amino acids, single carbohydrates, molecules of fatty acids, and then that really gives the cells the job of just transporting it, absorbing it, and using it up for fuel. So it is really, really good to have a digestive system. And I want to remind you that not all animals have a digestive system. Sponges do not. Invertebrate animals have a digestive cavity. Some of the more primitive ones have just a digestive cavity. It's different than a system because it simply is really a big bag where the food gets ingested. So here we're looking at a cnidarian with a gastrovascular cavity. There is only one opening to that cavity. So it kind of restricts. If you only have one opening, you must use this opening for both ingesting and, well, excreting what's left after digestion. So it limits how much you can eat, because when you're full, you're full. You have to expel the contents to be able to eat again. In simple organisms like this one, there's just one opening. There's no specialized regions, and the cells that are lining the digestive cavity are secreting digestive enzymes. More complex animals have actually evolved more complex digestive system, not surprisingly. If you have a more complex digestive system, you can eat a greater variety of foods. You're more efficient in your digestion. You can get more energy out of what you've eaten. And you can also eat a lot more in one meal. Of nematodes are animals. Here we go. Nematodes have quite primitive digestive system, but they actually have a system already. A system means it has a mouth, a pharynx, it has a designated intestine for food digestion and absorption. It also has an anus. That's very important because you can keep eating here and the food will kind of move along the intestine and the digestive products can be expelled at any time on the other end of the digestive tract. A little bit more complex system we see in the earthworm. Earthworms have a mouth, a pharynx for swallowing, and then they have two very specialized organs, the crop and the gizzard, for breaking foods down into smaller components. And then eventually that leads to, again, intestine and the anus. And then if we look at a vertebrate animal, a salamander, we can see that this is a really complex digestion, quite resembling ours, actually, our human digestion. So we have a mouth, an esophagus, And then we have a stomach, a designated bag that accumulates food and begins the breakdown. We also have a liver. That's a very important component, accessory component of a digestive system that allows for production of specialized digestive juices. And then we have a pancreas. We'll talk about pancreas some more. This is the organ that will deliver digestive enzymes directly to the intestine. And then finally, we have the cloaca for accumulation of waste products and the anus that allows to excrete waste products. Okay, so here's a question for you. All animals are heterotrophic and therefore must consume their food. Is that true or is it false? Yes, you're absolutely right. It is true. All animals are heterotrophs. Let's look at how what a basic passage of food looks like. Depending on the animal, the food that's ingested can be right away broken down into pieces, or sometimes it can be stored and then fragmented or broken down later. The next thing that will happen once you break the big chunks of food into smaller bits is chemical digestion. Chemical digestion is really breaking things down into single components. Proteins, breaking them down into peptides, carbohydrates, breaking them down into simple carbohydrates, and breaking down the big chunks of fat into single little molecules that can be absorbed. So these reactions are hydrolysis reactions, and they break down the nutrients down to their basic subunits. Then the products will pass through the lining of the gut and they will enter blood, and then blood will distribute those nutrients throughout the body. Let's look at the basic design of a vertebrate digestive system. This, of course, is a human. So here we have a tube, but a complex, very, very complex tube. It begins at the oral cavity, which is the port of entry. So the mouth, again, we have the pharynx. Then we have a kind of a straight tube called the esophagus. And the esophagus terminates in the sphincter that guards the entrance to the stomach, a big sac, which does the job of the preliminary digestion. From there, food goes into the small intestine where the majority of the digestion and absorption happens. The vast majority of digestion and practically all the absorption of nutrients happens in the small intestine. Finally, the food will pass to the large intestine, and at that point there is no more absorption of nutrients, but there is absorption of water and compacting of the waste material that is eventually expelled through the rectum as feces. In addition to these basic digestive organs, vertebrates have also a number of accessory organs. Some of these are liver, which produces bile, the gallbladder that will store and actually concentrate the bile that's produced by the liver, and then the pancreas. We've already talked about pancreas and its endocrine functions. Here are the exocrine functions of the pancreas. The exocrine functions are production of pancreatic juices that contain digestive enzymes and production of bicarbonate. Now let's look at the layers of the gastrointestinal tract. So when we look at the gastrointestinal tract, it is composed of a number of layers, and if we start from the innermost layer, we can see that lining the lumen is the empty space, empty cavity, we have the mucosa. Mucosa is the layer that produces mucus. So this is going to be the single layered epithelium, columnar epithelium, that is involved in absorption or digestion. And underneath that, we're going to have a space called submucosa. supporting the mucosal cells. And then we're going to have layers of muscles. Remember that the gastrointestinal tract is engaged in movement of food, which we call peristalsis. So we're going to have very strong, powerful muscles that will be able to carry out this function. And these are smooth muscles. They are under the control of the involuntary nervous system or the autonomous nervous system. We really can't control the peristaltic motion with our will. But these muscles, nevertheless, there are two layers of them. These, you can see right here, they're controlled by a number of nerves. Those are the little yellow nets that you see here. And we call these the myenteric and the submucosal plexus. Plexus is this network of nerves, the enteric nervous system, an autonomous enteric nervous system that regulates the contractions of the gastrointestinal tract and also regulates secretion of the digestive enzymes, secretion of hormones that are necessary in producing hunger and food-seeking behavior and so on. So now let's look in more detail at all the components of the digestive tract. So let's begin at the mouth. Most vertebrates will have a mouth with teeth that can be used for chewing. We call mastication. So breaking food down into pieces, that's what we humans do, but not everybody has a mouth with teeth. Birds, for example, do not. So birds, instead of breaking food down in their beak, they swallow their food and then they fill their stomach, the gizzard part of the stomach, which is a big sac really that follows the initial stomach, and that gizzard is usually filled with little pebbles, rocks, and the churning action, the contractive movement of the gizzard actually breaks down the food into small particles, doing practically the same thing that our teeth do. Saliva is produced in the mouth from the salivary glands, and we have 3 pairs of those. Saliva is necessary to make the food easy to swallow. So it moistens the food. It's much easier to swallow something that's very moist than something that's very dry. The dry food tends to get stuck in our esophagus. In addition, the saliva begins the breakdown of starch because saliva contains an enzyme called amylase. Amylase is also produced by the pancreas, but beginning of the breakdown of starch starts in the mouth with the saliva. So next time you're eating, think about it and chew your food, especially if you're eating starchy food. Now, the next thing that happens after the food has been chewed is swallowing. Swallowing, at first, we make a decision, let's swallow. And that's the only voluntary part of swallowing. The next thing that happens is a reflex, meaning it's a predetermined set of muscle contractions. And that's a good thing, because when we swallow, we do not want our food to go into where? We don't want it to go into the trachea, right? So it is a good thing that we have a reflex that blocks the entrance to the trachea and routes the food into the esophagus, which is where we want it to go. So esophagus is here in the back of the trachea. How do we do that? When the food is about to be swallowed, the soft palate is actually used to seal the nasal cavity, and then we have the glottis and the epiglottis in the back of our mouth, in the back of our pharynx, and so the glottis is pushed up against the epiglottis, and that will seal the opening to the trachea and will let the food go into the esophagus. And we know what happens if we try to talk while we eat. Well, we're going to choke and we're going to get food in our trachea, and then we'll immediately begin another reflex, the coughing reflex, to eject that food that is going into our trachea, where it shouldn't be going. Now, after we swallow, the food moves into the esophagus. And in the esophagus, peristalsis begins. Peristalsis in the esophagus is aided by gravity, so it's a good thing to be upright after eating a meal because that helps the food pass into the stomach. The esophagus contracts and it pushes the bolus of food all the way down into the next organ, which is the stomach. Stomach is really wonderful. It's a big bag, very, very muscular. It's got actually the oblique muscles of the stomach, and then the circular, and then the longitudinal, so 3 layers of muscles. Now, these are not the same obliques that you work out when you're working out your abdominals. Those are different oblique muscles. So the composition of the layers, other than the muscles, is similar. So again, we have the mucosa, the layer of cells that is producing mucus, and the stomach lining, the mucosa in the stomach, has a number of other functions. The stomach is going to have specialized cells, the chief cells and the parietal cells. These cells will secrete the first primary digestive enzymes and will also secrete hydrochloric acid. So the parietal cells secrete hydrochloric acid, and the chief cells secrete pepsinogen, which is the precursor to pepsin. The hydrochloric acid helps helps to get the proteins denatured, and then the pepsinogen gets very quickly activated into pepsin, and pepsin begins the breakdown of proteins. So really the only thing that begins to be digested in the stomach is some digestion of the protein. What else does the stomach do? The stomach churns the contents and acidifies and churns the contents. So it helps to prepare it for the digestion in the next portion of the digestive tract, which is going to be the small intestine and the first part of it, the duodenum or duodenum. Okay, so this is what happens in the stomach. Now, what I want you to remember is that the stomach doesn't digest carbohydrates or fats. So when I ask you that question on a test, don't tell me that digestion of carbohydrates happens in the stomach or the digestion of fats happen in the stomach. It does not. It really does not. Stomach can absorb a little bit. It can absorb water. It can also absorb alcohol. So that's why it doesn't take very long for alcohol to enter the bloodstream, because it's already, some of it gets absorbed right in the stomach. The food leaves the stomach, and at that point it's called the chyme. It leaves through the pyloric sphincter and it enters the duodenum. So, question, does the stomach help in nutrient absorption? Yes, it does. No, it doesn't. Not really. No, it doesn't. The only thing it absorbs is water, and water is not considered nutrient. Neither is alcohol. So let's enter the small intestine. Small intestine is divided into 3 parts: duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. 4.5 meters long. So if you multiply it by 3, you're going to have the length in feet. It's pretty narrow, and in the small intestine, practically all of the digestion, all the remaining digestion, and all of the absorption happens there. If we look up close at the walls of small intestine, we can see that they contain villi, And if we look at each individual villus, so villi are the little outgrowths, and they really increase. They're like little fingers sticking out of the intestinal wall, and these villi, they increase the surface area that's available for digestion and for absorption. And within each villus, we have a number of columnar epithelial cells, and those could be either enterocytes, so those are the digestive cells that are involved in absorption, or they can be cells producing mucus. Those would be the little white cells that you see here. Those are called goblet cells. Inside each villus, we find veins and arteries. Arteries will deliver fresh blood, and that blood is going to soak up all the nutrients that are being transported by the columnar epithelium from the lumen, from the inside of the intestine, and they're going to enter the bloodstream and be carried away from the villus by the vein that's here. And also inside the villus is something that we have never seen before. This is called the lacteal. Lacteals are little lymphatic ducts. So inside them is not blood, it's lymph. The fluid, extracellular fluid that is being gathered throughout the body. So this is what's inside the lymphatic ducts, and these particular ducts in the intestine, they're called lacteals. They are used for fat absorption. Fat is not absorbed into the blood. It is absorbed into the lymph through the function of lacteals. Let's look at the absorption a little bit. So once the food is broken down in the small intestine, the single amino acids are transported with active transport across the brush border or across the intestinal epithelium into the bloodstream. Same thing happens with monosaccharides. Monosaccharides are simple sugars. They're produced by breaking down complex carbohydrates, and those will get absorbed into the bloodstream. And here are the fats. Fats, with the help of bile salts, get emulsified and broken down. These little droplets get broken down into free fatty acids and monoglycerides, and those get absorbed into the lymphatic capillaries. They pass through the intestinal epithelium as chylomicrons, and then they get into the lymphatic capillaries, into the lacteals, and eventually all the lymphatic fluid will drain into the bloodstream. That happens at the subclavian, left subclavian then. So eventually all that fat is going to end up in the bloodstream as well, but not right away, not within the intestinal area. The next thing that happens to food, well, after all the absorption, after the digestion, absorption has taken place, now it moves into the large intestine. Large intestine is also known as the colon, and there is no more digestion that's happening there. However, the large intestine has a very important function of reabsorbing the water and compacting all the leftovers. It removes the remaining electrolytes, so those would be salts, various kinds of salts. And the large intestine has another important function, and this is in production of vitamin K. Vitamin K is produced by the bacteria. The friendly microbes that live in our large intestine, they are busying themselves in producing vitamin K, so we really need them for good health. Eventually, all the waste products are going to be prepared for expulsion through the rectum. And we're going to take a break here.